contradict me as you wish, Thandekile.
Thank you, Ibo. And yes, I am going to contradict you on some of the aspects of your presentation. But yeah, thank you for that history. I think it's really important when we're talking about these things to speak about them in context and to understand what brought us here. So without wasting too much time, I'm going to get into my part of the discussion. And I want to say that if we're to be honest, many of us here have witnessed tensions between Ndebeles and Shonas in various aspects of our lives. And I'm saying this in cognizance of the fact that when we say Shonas, there's no such group as Shonas. It's a group of different ethnicities. Just as much as you explained, Ipo, right now, that the Ndebele state was not just a group of Ndebeles, but it was different ethnicities that grouped together. So please bear with me. I'm going to be using the terms Ndebeles a lot and the terms Shonas a lot because my study is in the context of Kukurahundi. And thanks to Kukurahundi, all the people from Matebeleland who were non-Shona became, at the time, Ndebeles, and the target was Ndebeles. So that said, I'm going to go back to what I was saying about all of us having at best just witnessed tensions between these two groupings, and at worst having perpetrated some of these tensions or spread stereotypes about Ndebeles are this or Shonas are that, you know. So that is the nature of our country. We are divided, and we're divided along ethnic lines in so many ways. And the thing is, a lot of people just hear these stereotypes and they just go with them without realizing just how deep this issue of ethnic tension goes and where it stems from, you know. So like I'm an example because I really knew nothing about these tensions growing up. You know, growing up, I was so blind to our different ethnicities. I had Shona friends, Tonga friends, Kalanga friends, you know, and I really did not know anything about any history that could differentiate us and differentiate us to the point of hatred between different ethnicities. But with age, I started opening my eyes to a lot of things that seem trivial. But as you look at them in the bigger context, you ask yourself, wait a minute. Like, for example, I would get into every government office in Gwanda, where I was born and bred. And for me to get service in the majority of those offices, I would have to be able to speak. It started to feel like oppression because I did not have a choice. I didn't have a choice. It wasn't, I'm a very fluent Shona speaker. I'm a very fluent Ndebele speaker. I can speak a bit of Kalanga, but when you get to a situation where you are forced in a country that has 16 official languages to only have one official languages as the language of business, as the language of the social language, then you start feeling some kind of oppression. And this is something that is difficult to understand if you have never felt it, if you have never experienced it. So it's these small things that you experience bit by bit until you start to feel also some type of resentment towards it, you know. So this was my first experience of the tensions between our different ethnicities. But my first real experience of hostility towards me, because I am from Matebeleland, was in university. I got a place at the Midland States University by force, basically, because my application was rejected, but there were so many other people who had lower points than me that got in. And you know, I remember I was quite an independent 18-year-old, I think, because I went to MSU by myself. After I'd been rejected, my father wrote a letter to Professor Zopo and asked for an explanation as to why I didn't get a place. And Professor Zopo was really cordial about it. He just wrote me a letter to go and give to the chairperson. I don't remember what was in the letter, and I got a place. But from that day, the chairperson of the department hated me. The first question he asked me was, are there no universities in Matabeleland? It seemed like an innocent question to me as an innocent 18-year-old, you know, and I'm sure I just answered, I don't remember what I could have said, but my 4 years at university were hell because that man never forgot, first of all, that he had denied me a place and then been forced to give me a place. Every turn, he would remind me that I'm from Matabeleland. He would make me feel that I did not belong. And it raised a lot of questions in my head. Why would someone be so hostile towards a student because of where they come from? And I remember there's a time I failed to hand in an assignment in time because my son was in hospital. When I told him, he failed me and said he heard that I'm always following Boso around the country. And you know, it was so ridiculous to me because first of all, I'm not a soccer fan, but the association that you are from Matabeleland, you support Highlanders is something that seems innocent, but there's a lot of stereotype that is deeply entrenched in those feelings and those sentiments that are expressed, and they are hate, you know. So I'm going to move to this point of hate and to say it is an undisputable fact that ZANU-PF hates people from Matabeleland, and that ZANU-PF perpetrated hate crimes against the people of Matabeleland. If hate crimes are defined, I'm going to read this out because I don't want to make a mistake. So hate crimes are defined as criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part. I want you guys to hold on to this in part because it's very important. So these are crimes against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, ethnicity, and so many other things. So Kukurahuni was a hate crime. It was murder and destruction of property and an effort to eliminate an ethnicity. The reason why this prejudice or this hate happened, whether it was politically motivated or it was motivated by whatever, is besides the point when it comes to defining it as a hate crime. ZANU-PF perpetrated hate crimes against the people of Matabeleland, and they perpetrated these hate crimes on ethnic lines. And this could have been, as explained by Ipo, because ZANU-PF hates anybody that votes against them. And so you need to understand that hate crimes do not mean that if somebody hates people of Matabeleland and perpetrates crimes against them based on ethnicity, it doesn't mean they cannot hate Ndaus because of ethnicity. It doesn't mean that they cannot hate Muslims because of religion. The hate is not mutually exclusive. A person full of hate can hate different groups of people. But we need to accept that what happened in Matabeleland was hate crimes. And this is from a victim's perspective. I know there are many different perspectives. There are perspectives from political analysts, there are perspectives from academics in different fields, but we cannot argue about the fact that Gukurahundi was a hate crime, and because of the scale, it was a genocide. It was motivated by hate against the people of Matabeleland because they voted against ZANU en masse in 1980. And it was a genocide because the only people that were targeted by the state and the soldiers sent by the state and by the ZANU-PF militia and by ZANU-PF citizens, civilians based in Matabeleland were non-Shona speaking citizens in Matabeleland. So this is important for us to say, uncomfortable as it may be, because there is no way we can solve this without accepting that there is a problem, and this problem is ethnical And it has resulted in ethnic tensions that are now spiraling out of control, because when you ignore a problem for too long, extremism comes into play, you know? So what happened was an extremist crime against a people, and that has gone ignored for so many years. And because it has been ignored, we are in danger of revenge crimes coming into place. You know, I'm a fan of art as a way of explaining things. And because of that, I read a lot of books and watch a lot of movies. I think there's a movie called A Time to Kill. It's an American movie, and it's about a Black man whose 9-year-old daughter, very young, I may be wrong on the age, but this man's daughter was raped by 2 white men. And when she was now explaining to her father, she was saying, I called you, Daddy, I called you, and you didn't help me. And the helplessness that this man felt upon hearing that his 9-year-old daughter had been so violated because of hate, that a hate crime had been perpetrated against his daughter. It was too much for him, to the point that he just picked up a gun and gunned down those 2 people that perpetrated the crime. So unfortunately, because this man was trying to meet justice towards the people, the 2 men that raped his child, but by doing so, he committed a crime, and justice had to be meted against him as well. So my point is that hate crimes beget hate, and it becomes a cycle. You know, it becomes a cycle of hate that is difficult to quell the longer the crimes go unfixed, or the longer we go without talking about these crimes, telling the truth about them. And that is what is happening in Matabeleland now. We've got many groups of people who are now saying, look, sorry, the host muted me for a moment. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. Okay, so I don't remember now where I was, but I think I was talking about cycles of violence, how if we do not go out of our way to fix these injustices that happened in the past, we're in danger of having repeat cycles of violence. And we see that now, because there are many voices in Matabeleland that are now saying, okay, so ZANU-PF killed our parents, or ZANU-PF killed our children, and nothing was done to fix that. What is the point of us remaining part of this country that does not acknowledge the crimes that were perpetrated against us? What is the point of staying as part of Zimbabwe? Of what benefit is it to a Zimbabwean from Matabeleland to stay part of a Zimbabwe that perpetrated, whose government perpetrated a genocide against Matabeleland's people and got away with it? Not only did they do that, marginalization against the people of Matabeleland continues. And the institutionalized tribalism is something that we face every single day. So someone from Matabeleland will ask themselves, what is the point really of staying part of this country? Why not secede? And you know, I hear people talking about secession being extremist, and it shocks me that people will see extremism in feelings of wanting independence, but see no extremism in the perpetration of a genocide against an entire, not even one province, but against several provinces in our country. You ignore that extremism, but you see extremism in parties like MRP, who are now saying there is no hope for people of Matabeleland in this country. So why don't we just cut ties? Why don't we just break up? What is extremist about a breakup? What is extremist about a breakup from an abuser? Because what we need to understand is that Zimbabwe is under ZANU-PF government. And if we talk about secession, we are talking about seceding from ZANU-PF rule. So I really struggle to understand why people feel that this topic of secession is a no-go area, it's treasonous. How is it treasonous? If we are in agreement that ZANU-PF is a hateful government that has perpetrated crimes against all of us, why then, when some of the victims of the violence say they no longer want to be part of this country, you think it's extremism? What is so extremist about saying, I'm done with this abuse, I don't want to be part of it anymore? And remember, as Ipo explained, some of these borders are results of colonial rule, you know? It is because of colonization that Zimbabwe is Zimbabwe as it is now. So if we really want to go back that far in history, we will find more arguments for secession than against secession. And I want to make it clear that I personally do not believe that secession is the way to go, but I'm against the criminalization of secession as an option for people who feel that it is an option for them. Victims of abuse have got every right to decide for themselves how they want justice. They have every right to decide for themselves what justice means to them. And if there are victims who believe that justice for them is seceding from Zimbabwe, nobody should criminalize that. Instead, people should come to the table, have a conversation, and we decide what is the best way forward without criminalizing any of these sentiments that victims hold. Right now, we've got the MRP9 being—
sum up, Thandekile.
Okay, sorry. So right now we've got the MRP that's being persecuted and they're not getting any support because they preach secession. And I find it really hypocritical, because we cannot persecute each other because our way forward is different. Anyway, the bottom line is that we need to talk about what happened in Matabeleland. We don't have to bury our heads in the sand and say it was not an ethnic, what happened was not ethnic, because it was, according to the victims, who, as in my article I explained, were either killed or saved because they were non-Shona speakers. So we need to talk about these things. We need to come together if we are indeed one country with a vision for peace and reconciliation. There can never be peace if there is no justice, and there can never be reconciliation if there is no peace among us. But how do we achieve that peace? We achieve it by acknowledging the crimes that were committed against some groups in our country, by acknowledging the gravity in as much as, yes, bad things have happened to everyone in our country, but we need to acknowledge that a genocide is at another level altogether. Anyway, I think the other things I'll say as we discuss, but thank you.
Thanks, Thandekile. Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm sure there will be questions. Some are coming up already. Is it justice or secession? Others are saying, what is the basis of secession? Who are these people talking about secession? Others are saying, are you conflating the ZANU-PF with everybody? And is the state the same as the generality of the population? These are questions which are coming up, but I think we move straight to Keith. Keith Silika.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for Dr. Mandaza for inviting me to this interesting discussion. Thank you, Thandekile, for your discussion previously. And there are things that I agree with you and the things that I'll disagree with you. I'm going to start off with my personal journey in terms of Gukuraundi, and I'm also going to discuss the Shona question and semantics of identity, And I'm going to finish up with possible options that can reduce ethnic strife between different groups that broadly described as Shona and Ndebele. My own personal journey in terms of studying Gukuraundi and searching and even knowing about Gukuraundi started in Morris Depot when I was housed with another Ndebele constable called Constable Lunga. So we were housed together because my surname is Silika and his surname was Lunga. So the instructors thought we were both from Matabele and I was not from Matabele. And there will be one of the senior instructors will constantly give us very difficult tasks. And I never understood because I was quite young then, I was only 20. And I said, Lunga, why is this instructor doing that to me? And he said to me, because my Ndebele is not that good, he said, Umuyama 5th Brigade. I was like, Umuyama is one of the 5th Brigade guys. I was like, oh, I did not know anything about CCJP. I did not know anything about what happened in Matabele. It was only when I moved to England, then I started researching and getting my eyes open with in terms of Gukuraundi. So that's that. I wanted to make that introduction to make people aware about the complexities of using Shona and Ndebele in general. And also, so my surname is Silika, it's got an L and there's no L in Shona. And when I've been researching Gukuraundi, sometimes people will be saying like, oh, you're going to start conflict here, one of the Ndebele. And when I'm with Shona people, I get a different kind of response. So there is kind of attrition, as Thandekile mentioned. I'm also going to agree with Thandekile on several issues that she has raised in terms of the marginalization of people from Matabele in political context, in terms of economic context. We all know that Matabele is very developed. And we all know that there's, in terms of Gukuraundi, there's been lack of acknowledgement by the state. There's been memorialization of Gukuraundi has been banned. There's no birth certificate and death certificate for surviving victims. So there's this intergenerational continuation of what happened in Gukuraundi because people are still suffering loss as a result of that. One of the ridiculous things we come across recently is the recruitment of non-Shona speakers to teach in Ndebele speaking schools. That is a cause of strife as well, because I disagree that how can people from other parts go and teach in places in which they don't have the capacities, particularly in teaching those particular languages. So those areas I broadly agree with Thandekile what she said. It's quite that's quite apparent. However, the old actually issues that I disagree slightly is characterization of an individual being Shona, and also when it comes to Gukuraundi, we need to define our perpetrators, which was ZANU-PF. We know that it was ZANU-PF. It was a ZANU-PF idea which started right after independence. We know the army that caused it. We know that the Central Intelligence Organization was involved in those issues. And we know some members of different army groups were involved in Gukuraundi. And also the makeup of those organizations was mixed. There were white people, there were Ndebele people, they were called Shona people. All of these people were responsible for Gukuraundi. So that all those issues kind of muddles the general characterization of the perpetrator. So I prefer using, as you mentioned previously, defining the perpetrator as ZANU-PF. And ZANU-PF did not start this Gukuraundi strategy. It did not end the Gukuraundi strategy after 1987. They continued to decimate opposition because of Mugabe's desire for a one-party state. It's very important in that context. If I can quote one of Africa's most famous writers, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, when she said, "Show people as one thing over and over again, and they become themselves." So there's dangers in labeling the perpetrators constantly as Shona. And also I can quote, there's a famous good book, which I'll post on the chat, called The Mods and the Rockers, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. It describes how people construct identities and culture and make it a thing, and those individuals become that thing based not only on what has happened or based on what people feel that is. So it's quite important. And I know you mentioned the book when you mentioned the ideology of tribalism. I've not read that, but I've got a guess that it probably describes some of the similar elements in regards the construct of tribes within Zimbabwe, etc. And also, I would like to touch on briefly on ancient Greek democracy idea that in terms of us approaching the attrition and strife between various ethnic groups, the Greek demarcated three individuals within society. They say they were idiots. They are idiots within society. They are tribalists in society, and they are citizens within society. Idiots are the self-centered people. Probably, I could say plainly, some of the ones that I found in ZANU-PF have all been responsible for all these atrocities that we see presently. And then there's the tribalist. There's nothing wrong in an individual belonging to a certain tribe and being proud of that tribe. What might be problematic is an individual having tribalistic, probably monolithic views. Those individuals, it's very difficult for them to be a positive contributor to society. The last kind of citizens that the Greek wanted are called the citizens. People who are open-minded and people who are willing to do work, and acknowledge ethnic differences, cultural differences in various individuals in order to move the problem forward. I think my time might be running out, I'm not sure. So I'm going to end in terms of what can we do about ethnic strife in Zimbabwe within the context of Gukurahundi. We all know that the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission that's been going on for the past couple of years is nothing but a front, delaying tactics for us individuals who want truth-telling and other transitional justice processes come through. So the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is now going to move the issue of Gukurahundi forward because they've demonstrated that, we want an open transitional justice process where it's victim-centered and it's open. In terms of victims, I want to touch that briefly, that Zimbabwe has over 10 Gukurahundi victim groups all wanting the same thing. And they're all perpetrating the same issues in terms of ethnicity and tribe, etc. That is slowing us down. I was fortunate enough to have a meeting with the International Commission of the Missing Persons Director in The Hague when I was presenting them my thesis. They were asking, like, what are the victims like? I say, we've got tons of victim groups. So that's quite problematic when an organization such as the ICMP would want to work with the Zimbabwean groups in order to advance and resolve issues surrounding Gukurahundi. So in terms of the NRPRC, we need a new thinking. Gukurahundi, I know Zimbabwe has so many organizations already in terms of transitional justice, but I think Gukurahundi needs to be housed on its own with commissions and directors and a structure which contains various people from history, archives, forensics, media, etc. So that's the direction that might work forward. Because I was fortunate enough to work in Ireland, for similar commission on the forensic context. Again, victim groups, despite in Ireland victim groups being slightly divided, it's almost in Zimbabwe, they came together. They were victim focused. They came together to search and identify their missing successfully, despite their own differences between the nationalists and the Republicans. They did manage to come together. And also the other low-hanging fruits that us citizens of Zimbabwe can contribute towards Gukurahundi in terms of political advocacy, in terms of legislation, and people like me in my background in terms of forensics. For example, we have MDC, Roll of Honor, victim groups. We don't have that as far as I'm aware, for victims of Gukuraundi. And we have free software from the ICMP, which is readily available for us to utilize, because we need a list of all those individuals that were killed in Matabeleland, so that we can have accountability. So these are the things that we can do on our own. Also, we can also draft our own bills and legislation, but that will also depend on the political climate, that will what sort of parliament we have, how many people we have in there, so that we can pass certain bills. Because all the things, all the issues around Gukuraundi and political violence and all the strife that's happened in Zimbabwe has happened somewhere else. And what has worked in such places here in England and also in South America, there were dictatorship that exploited divisions within their population. But when those victims and individuals came together, those dictatorships failed. And some of them, as some of you are aware, even then, people are still looking for the Nazis, 70, 80 years down the line. So we can also do the same. We need to, come together and probably be careful with our language in terms of labeling individuals in a certain way. I've got like really, really good professors from various different backgrounds who wanted to study Gukuraundi sometimes, and they're very, very, they're not comfortable in terms of those labeling, and some of them have been labeled Gukuraundi people when they have been trying to write books about it, that kind of thing. So that is my small contribution towards what's the problem in terms of the attrition within the country, and also how can we resolve it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks very much indeed. Just want to try and moderate the discussion. Two things. One, we want to speak about victims of violence, victims of state atrocities, without a hierarchy of suggesting that some victims are more important than others. That's one. The second more important is that we need to make such atrocities or genocide as Gukuraundi not an ethnic issue, but a national issue. It must be dealt with in the national context. And as long as we particularize it and put it in a separate category, we run the danger. As much as the state has sought to do that in the manner in which it perpetrated that violence in the Gukuraundi years, we should not fall victim. The citizens, to take your term, Keith, we the citizens should not fall victim to that. We need to address problems such as these in a national context. I'll ask Dinizulu Mpofu to help us in putting everything together before we turn this to discussion. Forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mwalimu, Professor Igbomandaza, for this platform, and the many colleagues that are participating here and others that are connected in this virtual space where we are trying to navigate and negotiate ourselves in understanding these troubling issues before us. My principal argument, which is also my capital observation and also conclusion, is that what we have in Zimbabwe in terms of a government in the present, an administration of what is supposed to be the nation state, is actually a native colonialist regime that took over from the secular colonialist regime of Ian Smith in 1980. And my presentation will seek to flesh out that observation, argument, and conclusion with ethnic strife in perspective. I seek to argue that in the same manner in which secular colonialists weaponized racial classification, racial discrimination of the people in order to perpetuate colonial dominance of the polities and the economies. The ZANU-PF regime in Zimbabwe has weaponized ethnicity in the same manner. There's a way in which secular colonialism managed to graduate some of its modes and tools of rule right into the movement that was supposed to be fighting it. And what came in 1980 was a native colonialist regime that is so far, through Kukuraundi and other festivals of cruelty and violence, demonstrated all things colonial in terms of rule. They call it Ukutonga. And the country itself has been collapsed and compressed to an object called Chinu Chetu, our thing, Oguyindo Wetu, and all that. So all that language actually brings it to life. What has happened historically, where what was supposed to be a nation state in a country has been collapsed into a native colony of a kind. Right. In its genealogy and birth, the nation state itself has got many understandings that have been circulated about it, but I want to privilege the events of 1492 in southern Spain with the conquest of Granada, parts of Al-Andalus and Andalusia, which were the remaining city-states in the West that were not under Christians and Europeans, that were under the Moors, the Muslims, and some Jews. So in 1492, actually in January, when Granada was conquered, the nation that had conquered, the Christian nation, had to have a state. And the state that took over Granada from King Mohammed had to have a nation. That is, people were to be one, under one flag, one religion, uniform aspirations, one national anthem, if you wish. And that nationhood was not persuaded. It was not legally built. It was not built out of consensus, but out of conquest. Jews were forced to convert from Judaism to Christianity. Muslims were forced to convert from Islam to Christianity. Those that resisted were crucified and destroyed. So there was forced conversion of some by the conquerors. And some people, especially women, that had knowledge, that had power, and that were doing certain important jobs, were burnt at the stakes as witches. So the women that participated in politics, in medicine, in healing, and everything were pronounced as witches and described as people that were beyond salvation, that could not be civilized, and they were burnt at the stakes as witches and sorcerers that the nation state could not live with. I'm going on and on this conquest of Granada, because that is the event where the template of colonial conquests and imperial invasions that took place in the entire global South, Asia, Latin America, and Africa were based on. So the way Africa, Asia, and the Americas were conquered, the template of that particular kind of conquest, the conversions, invasions of territories, massacres, ethnic cleansing, and everything were generated, demonstrated, and dramatized first in Granada. So that template of colonial conquest was carried over to the entire global south that included us in our corner and that dark armpit of the world that we have found ourselves in, called Zimbabwe. After that, we realized that within Europe itself, there were wars, conflicts, most of which were actually religious, national, ethnic, economic, political, and otherwise. Like the 30 Years' War that ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. What was the achievement of Westphalia 1648? It was the modernization, democratization, and civilization of the nation states in Europe. Westphalia was an agreement that let's recognize each other's differences as Europeans and whites. Let's respect each other's nationalities, borders, sovereignties, and humanhood, and live together in tolerance, in peace, and in civilized competition for resources and for power. Tragically, and much unfortunately, that Westphalian epiphany, that Westphalian discovery, and the importance of the common family mood of human beings was not extended to the global south. It was retained as a gift and as a resource of white people, of Europeans, and those that called themselves civilized, the masters of the universe and the conquerors of the earth. So in the global south, the forms of conquest and colonization and so-called civilization that took place remained based on ethnic cleansing, forced conversions, massacres, and biblical violence, where people were killed in large numbers and killed using inhumane modes of mass murder and other forms of colonial evil that we continue to witness. So the happenings of 1884, 1885 in Berlin were happenings that were an extension of that politics of conquest, where a continent was sliced up like bread, resources carved for the consumption, control, and domination by selected European powers that took charge of different provinces of the continent. Nationalities and ethnicities of the continent were severed, cut across, divided, moved, scattered, squeezed out, and dispossessed and displaced as did we. And all that was part of colonization in its amplification and multiplication in imperialism. And then one would expect that when liberation movements came in the 50s, in terms of rhetorics and talks, in the 60s, and they intensified in the 50s when countries like Ghana became independent, right up to our own time, that those that were appointed, who appointed themselves liberation fighters, will find it important to decolonize the nation states and these colonial modes of rule and these colonial modes of governance and these colonial modes of conquest and domination of one by the other based on identity politics. But what happened, in spite of many calls by people like Kwame Nkrumah, George Padmore, and others that we should have one United States of Africa that would be ruled using the ideology of Pan-Africanism and all that, toxic African nationalism prevailed, that there should be nation states that govern themselves, that enjoy certain sovereignties, and that pay tribute to Pan-Africanism only through or multilateral organizations like the Organization of African Union then, what we have now as the AU, what we have now as SADC and all that. But toxic African nationalism managed to triumph over the spirit of Pan-Africanism and unity amongst the people of Africa. And genocides, massacres, and other festivals of violence and cruelty became possible in Rwanda 1994, in Zimbabwe 1982 to date, because Kukurahundi, as Thandekile was talking about, it is an ongoing genocide and epistemicide, not a thing of the past. The question is, how is it proceeding? How is it happening? We can talk about that. Right. Tragically, if one looks at such a so-called liberation struggle, like the war against secular colonialism in Zimbabwe, if we consult statistics now, many Black Rhodesians then died of struggles within the struggle than those that were killed by secular colonialists. There was more killings of Black people by Black people than there were killings of Rhodesians against Black people. And Kukurahundi itself dropped more bodies, more graves than were dropped by the secular colonialist regime of Ian Smith. So the structures within the structure that Masipula Stole fleshed out and other historians and scholars have fleshed out were much deeper and much troubling than we normally take them to have been. So my argument there, Mwalimu or Professor Mandaza, is that the liberation struggle itself got colonized to an extent where it collapsed from a struggle of liberation to a struggle of conquest and dominance of the post-colony by a native elite. Well, for us that are interested in research, you can consult Professor Peter Eke of Nigeria on colonialism as a social system, where he describes how the elite in the so-called liberation struggles and the elite in the so-called secular regimes became forces and entities that needed each other. And they were all pitted against the masses of the people of Africa. So what we had in 1980 was a native elite taking over from a colonial elite. And what was delivered was native colonialism. Kukurahundi, as large-scale murder, as a genocide with economic, political, social, and cultural ramifications and spiritual effects, was a telling symptom of native colonialism, where some natives had taken over from seculars and had become colonialist and were prepared to cleanse the Zimbabwean soil of those that were now called pollutants, impurities, the chaff. The name of Kukurahundi, translating Kukurahundi to English, means chaff that must be flushed out of the land, that must be cleaned and washed away. That's what was happening. It was a manifestation of native colonialism at its biblical extent. Professor Mamdani narrates how the Tutsi genocide of 1994 itself was also a development of native colonialism, where Hutus, using the Hutu power ideology, identified themselves as the natives of Rwanda and had a duty to God and a duty to the motherland and the fatherland to cleanse the land of Tutsi impurities and pollutants. People can ignore this or neglect this in their research, observation, and expression, but there are so many books published by Zimbabweans, right from Morris Lawrence Bambe's An Ill-Fated People and other texts, that clearly portrayed Ndebele people as settlers that ran away from Chaka and came to what they describe as Zimbabwe, and these people are foreigners, should go back where they came from or behave as foreigners and be content with the crumbs of the national cake that fall on the ground for them to pick and not demand more because they are not authentic natives. Those discourses are there and they worked in the politics during the Bush War against secular colonialism, and there were some in ZANU-PF that felt that they were the prophets of the land, defenders of the motherland and the fatherland, that had to deal with the Ndebele question in Zimbabwe after dealing with the Rhodesians and all that. Those are facts, unfortunate as they are, of history that cannot be ignored as drivers that drove Ukukurawundi. And I did say that right inside the liberation struggle, native colonialism and nativism as an ideology was born. And this nativism was to explode into a genocide after Rhodesian secular colonialism did a legal and political retreat, even if it didn't do an economic withdrawal. Right. And Frantz Fanon has given to us on the table a description of how African nationalism degenerated from nationalism as it is supposed to be a unifying ideology to nationalism as a divisive ideology, where we moved to chauvinism, ultra-racism, ethnicism, and other toxic ideologies that divided the people. And we ended up with the same colonialism that we were fighting, only that now that colonialism was now being driven and brought to life by some natives. So tribalism became political capital that was usable. For Mugabe to reduce Nkomo from Father Zimbabwe to father of the dissidents to a tribal chieftain and to some non-entity there by the corner, the ideology of tribalism that Mafeche Ranza talks about had to be propelled. It had to be injected into the people of Zimbabwe and made a passion. The people of Mashonaland in the main were educated into tribalism, which they didn't know, were fueled and impassioned with tribalism. A very great book written recently by Professor Miles Tandy reveals tellingly, and using some of the finest social science, that actually the first political party to have dissidents was ZANDA. More than 3,000 ZANDA cadres were commandeered by Rex Nongo and the hierarchy of the leadership there, not to report to the assembly points, to prepare to campaign for ZANU-PF, and to monitor the villagers in Mashonaland who were supporting ZAPU, who were preparing not to vote ZANU. So there was ZANDA dissident activity in Zimbabwe in 1980 and afterwards. And that history is not properly fleshed out. What is magnified and amplified is how ZIPRA and ZAPU had dissident bandits and all that. And that history might be a subject and a topic for another day. Right. Frantz Fanon, one could think he was talking about Zimbabwe when he described how natives can actually degenerate into colonialists. If one listens to the language that was being used by Nkomo, or that was being used by Mugabe, Inosinkala, and the cadres in ZANU-PF, talking about the people of Matebeleland, about ZAPU, about Joshua Nkomo, that was colonial language. People were called things. People were named in derogatory and hateful terms that Thandekile was describing before us right now. Mwalimu Professor Mandaza, I want to argue that Zimbabwe has not even attempted to be a nation state. There has not been even an experiment or a pretense at it. But what possibly it attempted to become was a state nation, where a certain political party colonized state institutions, state systems and structures. And the state became the party and the party became the state. There was that conflation. And that state nation made no attempt to build the nation. The attempt that was made was to build the party, to build the regime.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it told me that the host had muted me. I think it's ZANU-PF using witchcraft to silence me now. Thank you, Mwalimu. I'm back. Where was I? That a part has colonized the state, conflated it with itself. And what we have is a state nation at best, and at worst, it's a party nation. Masipu Lastole and John Makumbe talk about the one-party psychology that possessed Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF in the 70s and in 1980 going forward. That was a colonial psychology in my observation and view, and that is in place. What we have in Zimbabwe is a state that is a party and a party that is a state. And some authentic, original ZANU-PF members will tell you that what we have now is not ZANU-PF, but a faction of ZANU-PF that is calling itself ZANU-PF and is sort of, in their own view, migrated from the original plan or the original plans. So you might as well be talking about a factional state run around a family and a father, in the same way in which Mugabe had become ZANU-PF and ZANU-PF Mugabe, to the extent that Grace Mugabe could say anyone that opposed Mugabe opposed the nation and opposed the state. It's the same thing that is happening now. One only needs to read Professor Jonathan Moyo's Excel Gate, a book that every serious Zimbabwean should read, by the way. And one only needs also to read that report by the Citizen Maverick to show how the Mnangagwa family and its friends, not just the faction that is in power now, have literally colonized the economy and the polity. And that actually going to elections in Zimbabwe right now as an opposition political party is a waste of time, because the army, the police, the intelligence, the judiciary, and other structures of state power are ZANU-PF and forbid any prospects of political change. With the economy, every sector, mining, farming, manufacturing, right up to Omalaicha, that carry goods from Hillbrow to Cholocho, to Bulawayo, and to Harare. Now that the president, his family and friends want to have trucks that carry goods for people, they want to ban Omalaicha, ban cross-border taxes. That's how deep the colonization of the economy and the polity has been by the present native colonialist regime. Right. That monopolization of life, economic and political and social, by a small but powerful minority that is backed by the army, the intelligence, the police, describes native colonialism. So right from there, you can see a clear picture of what is happening to us and what is happening to Zimbabwe. Right, briefly about Kukura-Undi, I think Thandekile did justice to that specific subsection of what we're talking about today. Just like what happened in Granada, in Al-Andalus and Andalusia, Kukura-Undi was a war of conquest, like what Mwalimu Mandaza said just now, where certain people had to be politically neutralized, had to be converted from one political ideology to another, and they had to be forced to renounce a certain history and accept another history. Just listen to the language of Mugabe, Emerson Mnangagwa, and Innocent Gala during Kukura-Undi. It was the quasi-religious language of people being converted, people repenting, and people becoming something else that they were not. And in that war, tribal passions were fanned, tribal fires were ignited, and hatred was propelled, and that divided the nation almost beyond repair, to the extent that when Thandekile argues that doesn't secession make sense, you then see the rationale, you then see the understanding, and then you see the reasons why there are some authentic people that believe that they are nationless, they are stateless in reality. To the extent that one can say that, why do you blame MRP for talking secession when the ZANU-PF government has long forced non-ZANU-PF people and some non-Shona people to secede politically, spiritually, and culturally from the mainstream economy and mainstream polity of the country? The people that can be accused of secession, of tribal divisions, are clearly the people that are governing the party state or the state nation that we call Zimbabwe today, using the ideology of nativism that brings to life the native colonialism that I'm talking about. So what are we going through in Zimbabwe in closing? We are going through an elongated interregnum that Antonio Gramsci so forcefully described. That when the old is not dying and the new is not getting born fast enough, you have an interregnum where morbid symptoms appear. Kukura was a morbid symptom of colonialism, native colonialism. Mrambatsina was a morbid symptom of native colonialism. The recent shootings of unarmed protesting voters in 2018, Kukura itself, and the monopolization of the economy and the polity, the butchering of women, just like it happened in Granada, treating them as witches and wolves. Just look at how Grace Mugabe herself was treated when she showed political aspirations. George Mujuru, Thokozani Kupe, the words witch, war, sorcerer are brought into the fore, just like it happened in Granada. Professor Horace Campbell has written a powerful book on the patriarchal liberation mode in Zimbabwe. In that book, titled Reclaiming Zimbabwe. That's where we are in an elongated interregnum where colonial symptoms, colonial modes of rule, and native colonialists are in charge, where leaders rule as conquerors, not as liberators. And they do threaten this every time. Do this and then you will see Chino Chineve Nevacho ichi, Chino Chetu, Kutongwa Waro, and all those discourses that are actually symptomatic and expressive of native colonialism. Professor Mwalimu Mandaza, can I pack it here so that I enable the conversation to proceed and we join together? Thank you so much. Okay.
Gave you all the thing, you're driving it, so we couldn't stop you. We're driving it. I think it forms the basis of discussion now. We invite discussions. I think James Zulu brought in a new concept which I've read from him before: native colonialism, nativism as an ideology, state nation, party nation, factional state, all important. It has helped us to de-emphasize the ethnic basis of state violence and highlights the nature of these predatory violent states that we have. But I don't want to go too far and preempt discussion. I invite comments. Put up your hand, and Thandekile and Keith, come in as you wish. Tony Rila, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, everybody, for an extremely rich and difficult and problematic discussion. my reading so far on the discussion is that I think we're in no doubt that ethnicity is a problem and ethnicity is used as a tool for the maintenance of power. What does concern me, though, is history. Berman once commented that a nation that doesn't understand its history will never be a nation. And I think the discussion today amplified that. But I want to make some very specific points. And in particularly in the relationship to who has the right to challenge for the ills that they were done. And I've seen comments on the table that what happened in Matabeleland between 1882 and 87 requires special treatment. Now, I want to challenge this right now. The violations that happened in Zimbabwe, I think, could be characterized from pre-independence to now as a series of crimes against humanity. There's no doubt in my mind that were the right legal apparatus to be there, that what happened during the liberation and conducted mostly, and I disagree with Jethro, that the Rhodesian government committed crimes against humanity. There's no doubt in the definition. That's followed quite clearly in my mind, whether you call it crimes against humanity or genocide between 82 and 87 is again within the category of that. We could fit what happened in the elections in 2002 and 2008 quite clearly within the definition of crimes against humanity. Operation Murambachena, that has been described by a UN Special Rapporteur and endorsed by others as a crime against humanity. 2008, indisputably a crime against humanity. And the Human Rights NGO Forum has pointed out that the violations that have taken place subsequent to the coup could also be described as crimes against humanity. So the question I'm asking is, are some victims' situations more important than others? And is that not a product of ethnicity? Because the way forward is that the victims of the organized violence and torture that has taken place for nearly 50 years, do any of them have a greater right than anyone else? If you were smacked and tortured in a keep in 1973 in Dotito, is that worse than what happened at Balagwe? Is that worse than what happened to people in Mashonaland Central in 2002? Is that worse than it happened to someone else? I dispute that. So if you start from the perspective of the victims, then all the victims have common cause. So if you're going forward and you want to challenge the youth of ethnicity, it seems to me the victim's perspective is really critical. We're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter what happened to us as being distinctly different from one another. What matters to us that it happened to us, and somebody is responsible for that, and that is the state. And one of the important points that Ibo made right at the beginning is that's how the state has functioned for, I don't know, 140 years in Zimbabwe, is to use this tool of divide and rule and back it up by organized violence and torture and leave us divided. So when we have these conversations now about some victims are more important than other, I think that's a continuation and buying into the same story. Thank you very much.
Very powerful, Tony. Very powerful. I hope we're taking note. That's the whole point of raising this discussion to a higher level than particularization and really, as much as the individual is important, I think we need to keep it as general, as clear as possible. and veered towards even Jethro's proposition was really on the role and conduct of the states, state-sponsored violence. Let's have Melusi Nkomo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mandaza, for bringing a broad spectrum of perspectives, some bit populist, some radical, and some very critical. So take my contribution as either a question or a general comment. The first one pertains to the idea of the dialectics between collective narratives and what happens in actuality. So in this sense, I am of the idea, I might concur much more with Silika, yeah, that ethnic violence tends to take its ethnicity ex post facto after the fact, after the narratives have already come up. That's when people are then labeled that it's the Ndebelés who did this, or it's the Shonas who do that. So if we agree, as you have said, Dr. Mandaza, and what Dinizulu pointed out, that tribalism was constructed as a technology of governance during colonialism, how then does it become a primordial fact in the post-colonial state? So we are contradicting ourselves in there. So if it was constructed, ethnicity and tribalism during the colonial times, and if we agree that our post-colonial state inherited a lot from the colonial government, so it is the same tools, the same technologies of governance that are perpetuating themselves, which means that in Zimbabwe at the moment, the idea of ethnicity and tribalism is also being constructed by the present state. So we shouldn't contradict ourselves in that sense. So, okay, it was constructed during colonialism, then all of a sudden in post-independent Zimbabwe, it becomes a primordial fact that there are static categories of the Shonas, static categories of Ndebelés. That's my comment number one. Then a short one to add to that. There's also the idea of also a dialectic between the what we call the state and those they dominate, which explains why there is always renewal within the Zimbabwean state or within ZANU-PF itself. And mind you, my point is not vindicating the brutality that happens in Zimbabwe. I'm just suggesting that the state in Zimbabwe feeds also on the people that it dominates, which explains why in as much as we don't want to acknowledge it now, there is renewal in the leadership within ZANU-PF from the ranks of the people who were formerly dominated. Just as an example, a lot of artisanal miners, so-called Makorokoza, are finding themselves moving up the echelons of power in Zimbabwe. Take, for example, the Minister of State Security, and a lot of others coming from the Midlands province. So there is always this dialectic. Let's not take the state as something that is monolithic, static, and not moving. There is a dialectic and even complicit of the dominated Zimbabwean people, which explain the longevity of ZANU-PF and the continued brutality that is perpetrated on its citizens, a lot of times without accountability. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Melusi. I'll take Tawanda Mtasa and then the brilliant Mhlanga.
Thank you very much, Ibo.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much. I also appreciate all the inputs from the various commentators. I think they're immensely helpful for a very important conversation. So briefly, I wanted just to come in on a couple of points. I think firstly, it distresses me actually that Thandekile even had to put in that energy in trying to make the point that this was a genocide. Be such a given that generally that's a point that actually should not be emphasized. I think it is clear in terms of international law that what happened in Matabeleland and Midlands provinces, the 1982-1987 period is a genocide. And that is not unimportant because these labels under law attract certain consequences. So the same way that we have had cases, for instance, like Bosnia and Herzegovina versus Serbia and Montenegro at the International Court of Justice, as an example, it is possible in the same way that you can have a state that can take Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a party to the Genocide Convention from 1991, from 13 May 1991. Zimbabwe is a party to the Genocide Convention. Have a state that is a party to the Genocide Convention take Zimbabwe to the International Court of Justice under Article 9 of the ICJ of the Genocide Convention, and actually say Zimbabwe has not performed its obligations to its people in terms of the crime of genocide. So it's not unimportant, and I'm glad that you are emphasizing that. It's a pity, like I said, that it has to be emphasized. But secondly and separately, I think the fact that what happened in Matabeleland and Midlands is indisputably a genocide, I think should not make us get confused about the perpetrators. So in my view, I think Sipho has made the point, and I think it's a very legitimate point in the commentary, that, and I think Thandekile also emphasized the same point, that the narrative of victims is critical. So when victims say, this was what was done to us on this account, we should listen. However, in the same breath, let's also not forget the role of leadership. And the role of leadership is in the same way that we see those videos where Tongogara is saying during the liberation struggle, we are not fighting whites, we are fighting a white system. The role of leaders, those of us who participate in these meetings, those of us who have the privilege to go through the learning that we go through, to go through the reflection that we go through, to go through the discussions that we go through. The role of leadership is also to explain to victims that, no, it wasn't Shona people. It was ZANU-PF perpetrating violence, perpetuating a particular ideology, which was cast and based within the context of how it sought Shona hegemony, but it wasn't Shona people. And that distinction is not unimportant. So I think that's part of what I heard Kate also emphasizing when he was saying it's important, I think, for us to build that unity of victims, as it were, so that it becomes a national question. It's not an ethnic or tribal or provincial question to be relegated to those that are concerned about what is happening in a particular province. It is a collective issue for the nation, for all of us. Indeed, perhaps for humanity. That's why I was saying we can even lift it to the level that it must be, which is that it is a crime under international law, which humanity, as it were, is concerned about. And then the third and last point I wanted to make is, I think, having said that, it's also critical, and I agree with the point that Tony was emphasizing. I think you also said that yourself at the beginning, Ibo, that let's also look at the vast panoply of our tortured history as a people, and the various incidents and episodes that we have had of crimes against humanity, of genocide, and so on. That should not mean that we conflate everything. We should attend to everything in its seriousness, in its specificity. But let's not compete for victims.
You finished, Tawanda? Tawanda? Tawanda.
Unfortunately, I think he is disconnected.
Koji, yes, talking important stuff. Brilliant.
Thank you, Ibo. I want to begin by saluting all the presenters. I enjoyed your presentations. Keith, it's been a while. We should catch up. There are a few things that I wanted to comment about, which I have always at some point discussed with Keith and some colleagues, Dini Zulu in particular. Let me begin by first saying, one of our colleagues here just talked about the construction of ethnicity, and then Tony Rila also talked about ethnicity being a problem. Let me make it very clear here. My argument has always been, as an academic, that ethnicity is not a problem. Ethnicity, like all the I'm saying this because I refuse to accept that the view that ethnicity is merely just constructed and it's primordial. I argue that ethnicity is innate. It's part of us. We are born into it. And that said, I also want to foreground my argument by saying one of the things that we see if you look at Europe is that Europe is what it is because the states that we call European states are actually ethnic based. And ethnicity has never been a problem there. Dating back to even the Westphalia or even before the Westphalia, if you look at the Thucydides and other periods, ethnicity has never been a problem. But well, when we look at Africa, ethnicity has been presented in the post-colonial state in Africa as a problem. Why is that so? It's because during the liberation struggles, or well, I prefer to refer to them as the so-called liberation struggles, the mantra at the time that was brought by people like Amilcar Cabral and many other nationalist intellectuals was that for the nation to live, the tribe must die. And the problem has always been our failure to actually separate these two. What is a tribe and what is ethnicity? And our failure to actually understand this has caused us problems. For example, when the liberators said for the nation to live, the tribe must die, people failed to ask actually a very important question: whose tribe must actually be killed? And when we talk about Kukura Undi was the actualization of this mantra: for the nation to live, the tribe must die. And unfortunately, if you read, for example, the works by people like Ali Mazrui, particularly in his book, The Blood of Experience, The Failed State and Political Collapse in Africa, or even his work where most of the Zimbabweans, or the one that most nationalists in Zimbabwe hated him for, Ali Mazrui, Dual Zimbabwe towards averting political schizophrenia. You will realize that he actually highlights some of these things. He talks about some of these things. And the other person that I would have expected we were going to talk about here, Ibo, particularly your former colleague, is Professor Masipula Stole. His work on the salience of ethnicity in Zimbabwe. He actually made some very important points, actually emphasizing how ethnicity has become a very big issue, because ethnicity is, to us as people, is actually not primordial necessarily. It is by right supposed to be seen as, it's a natural resource, like we all have all the other natural resources. South Africa has been able to actually embrace this. Why has South Africa been able to embrace it is because they understood the African National Project, the way it had been configured and turned it on its head. And we in Zimbabwe actually failed to embrace this. The reason is because we have always seen ethnicity and this so-called tribe thing as a problem when it's not a problem. Having said that, I also want to argue alongside what Dinizulu Makiplana actually said, particularly when he was talking about when he brought in the Frantz Fanon's arguments. Frantz Fanon actually, in his book concerning violence, actually says the native's muscles are always tensed. You can't say that he is terrorized or even apprehensive. He is in fact ready at a moment's notice to exchange the role of quarry to that of hunter. The native is an oppressed person whose permanent dream is to become the persecutor. This is what actually we see in Zimbabwe when you look at Kukura Undi. And the person who actually makes this point who drives it home is actually Ndabaningi Stole, when he talks about how when they formed in 1963 ZANU as Zimbabwe African National Union, and then which was a nationalist movement in his view. Later on, it transformed itself to what he refers to as ZATU, Zimbabwe African Tribal Union. This is where we are. This is what we see. This is where Zimbabwe has always been. That is why we see Kukurawundi the way we see it. Dr. Ibo, I want to also emphasize or state this point that when I was a young academic based in Zimbabwe at some years ago, I had the opportunity of interviewing quite a number of ZANU-PF cadres. Key among them were people like Wilfred Manda, Zinachi Machingura, Edgar Tekere, and then also Kenan Banana and Hamad Ziripi. One of the things that they made very clear to me was that the salience of ethnicity could not be denied, and that Kukurawundi actually was clearly an ethnic issue. They had only captured the state, and as you would know, Zimbabwe is a successor state. When the natives captured the state, the tribal natives captured the state, they used the respectable gaps of nationalism. And then in their use of the respectable gaps of nationalism, they deployed the state assets, that is the army, on civilians, those that actually they labeled as belonging to the other ethne, the Ndebele. And this is why we find ourselves today talking about Kukurawundi. And I must also emphasize, having said that I am reminded here, Dr. Ibo, by Chinua Achebe's statement when he says, you argued earlier on, Dr. Ibo, before I bring Chinua Achebe's argument, you argued that Kukurawundi is supposed to be seen as a national problem. And I have always argued in my writings, and I still argue, even this is the argument I'm going to present here, that Kukurawundi is actually not a national problem. It is actually not a Zimbabwean problem. If it was a Zimbabwean problem, this has taken us more than 25 years to talk about, to openly talk about it like this. It is because those that perpetuated it, those that caused it, and those that are still perpetuating it to this day, one, they are in power. Two, they have also what we call banal nationalism. They have those that are still supporting it and who are at a moment's notice ready to say, no, but it is not all the Shona who actually perpetuated Kukurawundi, who actually committed Kukurawundi. Let me make this clear. I am a direct victim of the genocide. When Kukurawundi was actually meted on the Ndebele people, on the one hand, those that actually were foot soldiers, the 50th Brigade, made it very clear that they are doing so, they are murdering our people, they are brutalizing us because we and Ndebele is an ethnic issue. And on the other end, those that I interviewed, Wilfred Manda, Tekere, and all others, Hamad Ziripi, that I think, Dr. Ibo, you know, they made it very clear to me that actually Kukurawundi was an ethnic issue. It was only managed by ZANU because they had captured the state and they were using state resources, but it was actually an ethnic issue. It was clearly the Ndebeles being murdered, being brutalized, being massacred by actually the Shona. And they argued that they are doing so. And they gave some historical narratives. The point that we should do as Zimbabweans, if we really want to be Zimbabweans, is to acknowledge one fact, that this Kukurawundi thing was done by those that claimed they were doing it on behalf of other people. Those that want to deny it, or those that want to openly challenge it, must actually first openly come out and say, those that claimed to be killing people on our behalf were not doing so on our behalf. We do not support it. This is where we should begin. This is where we should be. If we do not do so, Dr. Ibo Mandaza, we will have a problem because we will continue to claim Kukurawundi as a national problem. Kukurawundi is not a Zimbabwean problem. It is actually a Ndebele problem. And thank you. Let me end it here for now.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think what we meant is that basically we need to make a distinction between a state, ZANU-PF state, if you want to call it, using state institution, the army in particular, security, CIO, to ravage a part of our population and the generality of the population. But I'm also saying that we have been done. We need to take responsibility as a nation to deal with that issue. you know. And I agree with you entirely that part of the resolution of the problem is that those who are responsible, and many of them are still alive, have to face the music. We need that. And the reason why as Keith has made reference to the NPRC, that it is getting nowhere, is because many of those who are responsible, directly responsible, as members of the state, security, army, are still around. And that constitutes a major problem which we must confront. I'll take one more, Wilbert, and then I'll ask my panelists to wind up, beginning with Denise Zulu and ending with Thandekile. Wilbert.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I think it's wonderful to have forums like this where Zimbabweans we can discuss issues of importance to our nation as a people. I think the first thing I would like to say here is that I think we should not forget that ZANU-PF is a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime. ZANU-PF, not generalize it into a particular tribe. ZANU-PF, yes, it may be predominantly people from a certain region, but nonetheless, people in that party are themselves corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical. And ZANU-PF is collapsing. I think it would be really tragic if ZANU-PF collapses and we fail to move the country forward. The challenge for us is to move the country forward when ZANU-PF has collapsed. And we should be very careful that we do not get ourselves really hooked up with what ZANU-PF did, the agenda that Robert Mugabe, Mnangagwa, and the rest of the tyrants set for the nation, and we forget to move the country forward. That would be tragic. One of the sad things about Gukurahundi is we keep hearing of stories like individuals or groups of people who are failing to get things like death certificates, birth certificates, passports, because of events that happened during Gukurahundi. This is another sign of a regime that is incredibly corrupt and incompetent. What is taking all these years to correct something like that? Surely you could send a team of lawyers or whatever it is into those areas that are affected, get affidavits so that people can say, okay, we do not have proof that somebody was killed, but nonetheless, the evidence we have gathered is sufficient to give us confidence to say X was killed. And therefore, then we are issuing the death certificate on that basis. And therefore, then their family can get on with their lives. What is so difficult about that? I agree with one of the presenters earlier on that some of these things have been festering to the point where they are really becoming a problem. And I think if we get rid of ZANU-PF, one of the first things we should do is go back to some of these problems. Not only Gukurahundi, I agree, some of the other problems that happened also during 2008, get some of those problems sorted out. And some of them you find they will cost the nation nothing. The other problem we have here is, like I said, ZANU-PF is incredibly corrupt. Sorry, yeah, I'll just finish. Corrupt and incompetent is that ZANU-PF has destroyed the economy, completely destroyed the economy. And I think the first top priority should be to rebuild Zimbabwe. The country is in a serious mess. There is mass poverty. That is the reality. And if we're going to focus on other things and forget the reality of people who are dying and who are not going to school, the health service has completely collapsed, we will be missing the point. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I now go to our panelists, beginning with Forward. But please, let's try and address the question: how do we begin to address the problem? And in the context of the national question. So, Dinizulu.
Right. I'll try and do it quickly, Prof.
Yeah, just 2-3 minutes.
Because we are out of time already. To begin with, I want to talk about the politics of naming. We should, in this case, name things that are happening to us and that have happened to us as they are by their names. And then and only then are we going to be able to deal with these problems in their actuality, not in how they've been rhetoricized or circulated, especially in the state media and all that. We can say we are fighting for human rights in Zimbabwe. We are fighting for democracy in Zimbabwe. We are fighting for development, economic growth, and other monikers. But if we do not get close to the thing itself, which is native colonialism, where some of us Black people have colonized the country, the polity and the economy, and are using colonial violence to sustain and keep their dominance, we will not get close to the solution. Because as I said before, going to elections as things are right now in 2023 is a waste of everybody's time. Because the judiciary, where we're supposed to appeal when elections are stolen, the army that is supposed to protect everyone if we were a normal nation, the intelligence that was supposed to foster state security, the police that are supposed to protect everyone under that environment, are all accessories and facilitators of this native colonialist regime. So why are we wasting time, money, and resources? What we have in front of us is a liberation struggle. That is a higher struggle than just human rights, democracy, peace, and other good sounding things. So I think one beginning point, Professor Mandaza, is let's name our condition for what it is, not circulate nicknames, fictions, and some impressions of the thing itself. Without truth-telling, without reparations, without institutional changes, without memorializations, and without accountability of perpetrators to victims, the starting point for transitional justice has not even begun. So let's name our problem. After naming our problem, it will be easy to name the solution. And I submit that before us is a liberation structure, not any other smaller structure than that. Thank you so much, colleagues, for this opportunity and platform.
Keith, you're still with us? Yes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, good evening. I'll be very, very brief. For me, in terms of ending attrition, particularly around Gukraund, as I mentioned before, we have got a few low-hanging fruits that us people are interested in the subject matter and the wider national citizens of Zimbabwe can do in terms of moving the issue forward. For example, we don't even have a website, for example, for Gukraund. We don't have a trust for Gukraund. We don't have victim names for Gukraund. So for me, those low-hanging fruit is something that we can do regardless of the state, because we need to data capture all this information, because at some point of time, that's when we're starting all our process of transitional justice, we've got all this information to which we can work on. At the moment, we have nothing in terms of even in terms of books, we only probably had 2 or 3 Gukurahundi books. You know, we need more books, more education to circulate so we can keep people informed. We only have probably maybe 4 or 5 Gukurahundi documentaries. Work needs to be done on that regard as well. We also need to frame white papers, legislation that can feed into a new state when it's given birth, whereby we can use such legislation to move forward our transitional justice process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith. Thandekile, my dear.
First of all, thank you, Ibo, for this platform where I believe a very important subject has been discussed. We may not agree about so many things, but I'm encouraged by the fact that this conversation is on the table. So just quickly, I'd like to respond to a few comments. And I think one of the comments that has been repeated is that the perpetrator of Gukurahundi. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
No, I saw.
We can hear you.
I saw. Okay, thanks. So the thing is, we all know that Gukurahundi was a state-sponsored genocide. It was ZANU-PF that did that. We know all the perpetrators. We know from Mugabe, Shiri, from I mean, all of them, we know them by name, Sekeramai, by virtue of the posts that they held at the time and because of the propaganda that they spread and the comments that they made. But we need to accept that state violence does not occur in a vacuum. State violence occurs in front of all our eyes, and state violence at times is targeted at different groups. So how did the state violence occur? It occurred when the state decided to eliminate one of the groups in our country. And if we do not acknowledge that, it means we are not empathizing with victims to whom Shona supremacist propaganda was built during the time. If we are to solve this, if you are to solve any hate crime, it should come from a position of understanding victims. It should come from a position of empathy. So unless we are ready to really empathize with different victims of the different atrocities perpetrated by the state over the years, we are always going to be fighting amongst ourselves and having these conversations about which victim is worse, which victim is better. If we look at history and other genocides that were perpetrated, if we look at the Holocaust, we talk about the Holocaust every day, but the Nazis did not just kill 6 million Jews. They had 5 million other victims from blacks, homosexuals, gypsies, different groups. But we talk
We can hear you now. You're muted.
Oh,
You're
okay.
frozen.
I don't know what's going on.
Wind up quickly.
Yeah, so I was saying it's not about which victim is worse, but it's about the gravity of the crimes. We talk about the Holocaust, despite the Nazis having killed 5 million other people, gypsies, blacks, and everyone, not because those victims were unimportant, but because of the gravity of the crimes and because there are some situations that we must never, ever allow again in our future. So anyway, I'm just glad that we had this conversation, and I think it's a learning curve for all of us. But like William said, there can never be justice without acknowledging that there was a crime. The major forms of justice are restorative justice, where you acknowledge that a crime was committed in the past that created an injustice. So we'll fix it by developing the area where it was done, by giving compensation to people, but only if we acknowledge the crime. Distributive justice, which says that marginalized communities will also benefit now that we have acknowledged the crime, needs acknowledgement. All forms of justice, even justice that changes policies, can only happen once we acknowledge that.
Okay, Thandekile, you have a problem with your network, eh? Okay.
But thanks, yeah.
Thanks, Thandekile. I'm sorry, there's something wrong with your network there.
Okay.
Anyway, I think we have come to the end of the evening. And for me, before I thank the panel, is just to highlight firstly, the topic, which is the examining the Zimbabwe's national question in the context of examining the root causes of the malaise, ethnicity, ethnic politics, and in particular the atrocities, in the main of which is Bukuraundi, but many others, as Tony Rila has poignantly pointed out, that we need to look at the whole victims, the victims of contemporary Zimbabwean history, including those that fell as a result of our own, as Africans on Africans. Secondly, we need to look at the national question, which is the main focus. National question as a means, as a basis for building nationhood. We are saddled with it, the reality. Zimbabwe is there. It's a recognized state internationally. It is a nation state in the making with very dubious credentials up to now. But we have to attend to it, especially for future generations. Thandekile speaks of restorative justice. I think you are speaking to the wrong people. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot speak to people who are at one and the same time both the perpetrators of genocide and expect the same people to effect restorative justice. I think we have a problem. And that's why we're saying that we need a reform of the state. We need a new leadership which sees beyond the present. We need to restore constitutionalism. We need a Truth and Justice Commission. We need to reconfigure Zimbabwe. I think that is what the subject was all about today. We barely touched the future. I think we got bogged down even to the danger of conflating the national question of Bukuraundi. I don't think that was deliberate, but I think we almost fell into that trap. We need to go beyond that and accept that the resolution of the Bukuraundi question is important as part of resolve the national question. So I think on that note, I want to thank Thandekile, Keith, Selika, and forward to Dinizulu Jethro Mpofu for your contributions. This has been recorded. It's on Facebook, it's on YouTube. It's transcribed into a document, both for the record, but also for future discussions. As I said at the beginning, this is not exhaustive. It was never meant to be exhaustive. We've had, over the last 2 years, several meetings on this issue of Bukuraundi. Bukuraundi is important, very important, also because it is a reminder of the poignant failure of the post-colonial state in Zimbabwe, the failure to resolve the national question. It is a blot on our history. It hangs over us, all of us. As long as it is there, glaring at us, it's a poignant reminder that we have not yet established true nationhood. I thank you, and just to remind you, the next policy dialogue on the 13th of May, we're looking at the failure of a regional response to the Cabo Delgado crisis in Mozambique with the SADC, to be a collaborative event with other CSOs, not only in Zimbabwe, but across the region. And we'll keep you informed. Thank you, and thank you again. Goodbye.
Oh hlomi moto ona